Hi everyone, and welcome to Design Unlocked, a weekly showcase of 2020 graduates from the University of Dundee and Abertay University. Today's session is being hosted and organised by members of V&A Dundee's Young People's Collective. So today we have Emily, and we also
Hi.
have Fraser.
Hello. We'll start by telling you about what we do. V&A Dundee is the first ever dedicated design museum in Scotland. We're the only other V&A museum anywhere in the world other than London. The museum provides a place for inspiration, discovery and learning, and its mission is to enrich people's lives through design. The Young People's Collective, or YPC as we're known, was formed in 2017, a year before the museum opened to the public. Our group ranges from 14 to 24-year-olds, and we meet throughout the year every Thursday to get involved with lots of co-design processes. Over the past 3 years, we led different kinds of projects and programs. Before we even had the museum building, we started meeting weekly off-site to consult what the future programs for young people should include. We co-designed the V&A Dundee's opening 3D festival concert alongside light and sound installation, all in the heart of the city. Since then, we've gone to test, curate the events delivered for, sometimes by, young people. We've interpreted themes within the museums, spaces and exhibitions in ways that are relative and interesting to us. Our group doesn't attend any program that is decided to us from someone else. We contribute ideas together and design our program to make it work for us.
Design Unlocked is a series of discussions with 2020 graduates from Abertay University and the University of Dundee that have all been chosen by YPC to elaborate on their practice. We wanted to give the designers a space to showcase their practice, elaborating on their digital degree show presentations. Some design projects are especially challenging to display on digital platforms. Hopefully this conversation will allow a continued dialogue, letting us learn about each designer's process in their own voices.
Today's designer is Jonathan Duncanson, a computer games technology graduate from Abertay University. Jonathan is a designer who feels the classic coding language C++ has moved further and further away from the features that first endeared it to game programmers. For the degree show, Jonathan asked whether games programming would benefit from a new language designed to cater to its needs or not, designing and developing a new low-level programming language in an attempt to answer this question. Welcome, Jonathan. It's amazing to have you along today. We'll get started by asking you some introductory questions and then some more about your practice and your projects.
So the first question is, what does a day in the life look for you currently? So what's kind of your process?
Man, this is going to sound way less interesting than you'd think. So I'm currently working at a small independent studio in Dundee called Pocket Sized Hands. I'm not actually in Dundee right now, I'm working remotely. So a typical day, usually wake up around 6 to 8 a.m., get up, breakfast, everything, get into the office as in like whatever we're using for meeting up. Before 9 o'clock, we have a morning meeting at 10 a.m. and then we just kind of do work throughout the day. Usually sign off between 5 and 6. Think about how life is currently purgatory and it just doesn't end, and every day is basically identical for a little bit. Have dinner, socialize with my family who I'm quite lucky to be living with at the moment, and then go to bed and then repeat the process 5 days a week. Yeah, it's not as exciting as you would think currently because obviously we can't go outside.
Yeah, so quite repetitive, per se.
Kind of. It's interesting. It's not like sitting and doing the same thing every day.
Yeah.
Well, it kind of is, but like programming is all about problem solving, so it's like new problems every day. Go and solve them.
That's good.
It's great.
So has that method changed since when you were previously working, like designing stuff and coding stuff?
Well, when I was going to university, it was a bit different. Although it does have to be said that I got most of my work done in the comfort of my flat. I found that kind of conducive. I would go into the labs, and the labs where you're supposed to, in theory, do work, but what I would use them for is like kind of more socializing. So one of the things that I learned pretty early on is to learn from people who are far smarter than you, and they're all at the university, so you might as well go there. And I'm not just talking about like lecturers, I'm talking like people that are actually taking the same course as you. Like everyone has a different way of approaching problems, so it helps to learn from these people like as much as possible. And so that's why I would go in, which means as a consequence, I wouldn't actually do very much when I was there in terms of actually doing my coursework, but I would learn an awful lot from people who were doing different things. So it's different now that I can't even do that. I can't go in and see people. I know that the company that I'm working at has office space, but so we would all be like in the same creative environment, in the same kind of like room usually, but we're not. And as a funny quirk of fate, it was the week after I got confirmed that I would be working for them that the lockdown happened. So I actually haven't met a bunch of the people I'm working with in person yet, which is kind of weird.
No, totally. It's a really weird time for working in general. Can't imagine like starting a new job during all this is quite strange. So I guess connecting to your degree show and your uni time, what's the story and inspiration behind your degree show project?
See, this is a really odd, like this is going to come across like an odd answer to this, but there's a bit more behind why I actually chose to do the programming language project than you might think. Like, obviously, we get taught at Abertay, we get to use C++, which is the kind of industry standard language for games development. Like, even if you're using stuff like Unity, which uses C# for scripting or other stuff, generally you get taught in C++ at Abertay. Like, that's the language kind of throughout your entire degree. And after you've used something for 4 years and you find bits of it that you don't like, you kind of want to figure out if there are any alternatives. But there's actually another slightly more interesting reason why I chose to do this project. So at the end of my third year of my degree, I thought I had experienced like burnout over the previous years for deadlines, right? But I'm trying to think of the correct way to put this. At the end of third year, I was like properly burnt out. Like I had been working on projects. The mixed metaphor I like to use to describe it is I was burning the midnight oil at both ends. I was keeping a really erratic sleep schedule. I was like charging headfirst into these problems. And by the end of that semester, I was properly like done. I was like a husk. I wasn't able to sit down and do stuff. It was not a really good feeling. And I kind of promised I'd never, ever do that again. And so as a result of this erratic sleeping schedule, my YouTube recommendations became really strange. And by strange, I mean loads of weird theoretical programming language things would pop up. And one of them was a pair of lectures by Jonathan Blow about programming language that he was designing and that he's actually gone ahead and implemented. And so I was like, that's very interesting. I'd also been told, because there's a lot of pressure to get a dissertation topic kind of nailed down as soon as possible for programmers. We're not given as much time as other disciplines, but for good reason, because we tend to have a lot more of an uphill struggle to climb to actually get our thing done, because a lot of our grade is assessed on, have you actually made a working thing? If so, good. If not so, bad. And so I was like, well, I don't want to specialize, because that's what these dissertations tend to be. So for example, one of my friends did a very graphics and rendering related thing. He did a really technical thing for that, and he wanted to be a graphics programmer. So it becomes a way in our university of unofficially declaring which bit of games you want to work on. And I didn't really want to decide on that. I like to have a broad overview of everything. And so I'm like, well, what can I do that kind of touches every aspect of games development and technology without having to fully commit? And making a programming language seemed like a decent idea. And so I ended up submitting a proposal for it. And it also seemed like a good way to get hired is if you can, like, oh, what did you do for your professional, like for your like a dissertation project? Oh, I made an entire programming language. Seemed kind of like a fun thing to be able to say that I'd done. And also I need to say at this point, big shout out to Adam Sampson, who I believe is the current head of my course now, but he was the person who ended up supervising my project because he's the Abertay's kind of in-house programming languages and other stuff guy. He's legendary. Thank you, Adam, for supervising me and agreeing to do something that not many people would, in hindsight, have agreed to do. Yeah, so that's more or less the kind of inspiration behind it. I learned from smarter people and figured, if they can do it, I can probably do it.
Well, you did mention how lectures did kind of influence you. So have you got any other influences? Or do you have any favourite creatives that could have potentially shaped this?
This is like a list that kind of goes broadly into two categories of games related or non-games related. Actually, I have a list of them up somewhere. There it is. So like, obviously I've mentioned Jonathan Blow. He's the guy who made Braid and The Witness, and he's making his own programming language currently. So he's a huge influence. Around about the same time that I stumbled across this stuff, I also stumbled across Casey Muratori, who does a series called Handmade Hero, where they build an entire professional quality game literally from scratch, as in no external libraries other than like the operating system, which was, obviously it's an interesting series. It's actually still ongoing. It's been ongoing for years. It's a really intense project.
So obviously, me and Emily are both in high school, and we're both doing higher computing science, which is not necessarily gaming related, but it's definitely program based related. So we're doing stuff with Visual Basic and other things. What would be your tips into looking into the computer games technology industry, and where would be key places to go through, like to sort stuff out?
Okay, I need to preface any advice I give here with I'm a very weird edge case in that I say a weird edge case, not really in computing industry. I'm a straight white middle class male, so any of the obstacles I've had to face have been purely of my own making in a lot of cases. In fact, very largely have been. So I actually did higher computing when I was in high school, which actually isn't that long ago, because I left school a year early to jump over to Abertay to actually do that. So if you're going to go into games specifically, Abertay is kind of the place you want to be for various reasons. But I recommend, obviously I have to say that there is obviously a good place to start. If you're going to be doing if you're going to be doing games technology specifically at Abertay, it's a much more maths intensive course than the other programming ones that they offer.
I've heard that.
Yeah, please read up on maths. I cannot describe to you the horrors that I've seen in the 4th year maths module that I've done, but it really helps if you've got that kind of mathematical grounding. Even having higher maths and higher physics. Those are the two ones that I found invaluable for games development, because they give you a nice ground level introduction to how to make things like work and stuff, is the way I describe it. But I'm massively biased because I went there, but I'd say Abertay is a pretty solid place to go if you want to get into games and games technology in general.
So coding languages can be quite restrictive and are often specific to certain platforms, such as like Microsoft and Apple. And when in your artistic statement, you question whether games programming would benefit from a new language. Can you explain this viewpoint to us?
Yeah. So again, I think I touched on it earlier. The thing of once you use a solution for something or a tool for something for a certain amount of time, like usually over a long period of time, you notice kind of rough edges, things that you don't really kind of like about it. And C++ in the context of games programming is kind of unique, because most industries, there seems to be cycles for languages that go in and out of favor, but C++ is kind of in like favor for it's been in favor for the games industry for nearly 2 to 3 decades now. And nothing's really came in and displaced it. Oh, people have tried, languages have tried, but they've never quite been able to do the same thing. There are a few historical reasons for this. Like for example, the move from most games are written in like C or in some extreme cases assembly. They moved to C++ in kind of like the mid to late 90s. And the reason why that worked so well was because interoperability between those two languages was basically one-to-one. And now that we have a bunch of technology written in C++, people aren't really too keen to leave unless there's interoperability there. So basically the reason I was asking whether it would actually be worth us even moving in the first place is partially because we have so much technology already built in this language. Like, it's moving over isn't a trivial thing anymore. Like it is for people like me who are working on small projects on their own time as well, where I can just say, oh, I can just up and move to an entire new language. It's only going to affect me. But like huge companies like EA, or any of the studios working under EA, or Activision, or any of these places, they have a whole load of technology already there and built. And so I was trying to like open the door for exploration of, well, is it possible for us to move with as little friction as possible caused for like developers who already have a massive amount of established work in these kind of programming languages? The lens that I viewed it through my dissertation was there was a couple of different things I wanted to research. Unfortunately, due to a minor inconvenience of there being a global pandemic, I wasn't able to explore some of these. So one of the things I was doing was designing the language syntax itself. I didn't really get to do user testing that. But one of the other things about games is iteration time. So iteration is extremely important. The quicker that you can make a change and test the change and see if it works, and then repeat this process, the easier your job is. And C++, once projects get to a certain size, doesn't do this very well. And I wanted to explore that as well.
You think it's more difficult for non-English speakers to write, especially because I know C++ and most of the syntax is
it's English-esque.
English-esque, especially. I think the easiest one I can think of is HTML, where you're basically having heading is heading and so forth, and they're using starts of letters.
Yeah.
And with lots of language using different alphabets and all that, do you think it's tricky for people to get involved in these kinds of languages because they're foreign speakers?
Yeah, there's a few kind of different things I can think about for this particular question, because there's actually one of the things I did when I was researching for programming language stuff. You end up going down all sorts of interesting rabbit holes, and one of the more interesting things is there are actually programming languages out there that use other alphabets and are kind of written to be consumed and used by programmers of different with different language, not language proficiency, just different that speak and understand different languages, like Japanese or similar. So that kind of thing. There's a historical reason for most of these programming languages being in English. I'm now going to attempt to kind of spitball a theory that is it's vaguely unsubstantiated, but it's more to do with the formation of these programming languages and how they kind of came about in the first place. Because most of the money and the research that went into these was over in America. And don't get me wrong, there are universities in other countries, but it's a place where majority of people are speaking English, and it's mainly at the time white men who are doing the research, and so naturally they're creating things that make their lives easier, and they have a lot of research money in order to investigate these things. So naturally, the most popular languages will come out as being English spoken, or like things that make sense to English speaking people. For games, now it's become kind of commonplace to localize them to different languages. So you do become quite conscious of that. I mean, one of the things I've been working on in my spare time is getting text rendering working, like proper, like a graphics card rendered text rendering, and just getting it to work with our alphabet alone. This is with some significant help from like a few libraries for doing this kind of rendering. Just getting that along is very difficult. I haven't even opened the can of worms, which is like other alphabets, like the Cyrillic alphabet. And I can't imagine how difficult that's going to be. But you do become quite conscious of it, particularly the more research you do into it. So it's something I'm kind of conscious of, not quite in the day-to-day of what I do, but I've become more aware of it as a result of this project.
Do you think, it's quite a silly question this, but do you think if everyone learned how to code in machine code, in binary, it would make it easier? Because you only have to know 2 characters for that.
Oh God, I mean, I am an advocate for low-level programming, but maybe that might be going a bit, even I have to admit, maybe that might be a bit far.
I think what's worth mentioning within that is, so obviously Mandarin and Spanish are 2 of the most frequently spoken languages on this planet, and there are people developing coding languages in specific languages by country. There was an amazing example of Arabic coding in our video games exhibition that was at the V&A last year, which was really fascinating to see, not only because it's a different language, but because the coding is obviously being done in reverse because it's from the opposite side of the page. Yeah. I'm just wondering if you are aware of any other coding happening in native languages like that.
Not above a surface level. Again, when I was researching this stuff for dissertation fodder, as I call it, I did a bunch of kind of fairly surface level things, so I can't really speak to that in detail, unfortunately, but I wouldn't be surprised. I kind of like the more accessible programming becomes, the more kind of interesting stuff we'll get out of it, I think.
Going on from that, so your software, your programming language, I've got a question about how, so obviously video games is what you were studying, and obviously making a new language that based around video games is quite interesting in the concept of it's not an overview thing, because obviously C++ isn't just for video games, you can use it for other things as well.
Yeah.
But because your one is driven in that way, do you think out of video games you have at the moment that are out there, would there be any advantages to using your one, and any games in particular that are out, possibly just games you enjoy or something like that would fit with your language?
See, like, the reason that a lot of the decisions are made behind the syntax for I've mentioned all the, like, the performance related stuff and the iteration time stuff, but the syntax stuff itself comes down to stuff that's irritating about using a language designed in the 1980s in 2020. So, I mean, I'm just trying to think. Jonathan Blow's language that he's working on, a kind of Sokoban style game, which is basically, you know, grid-based, push crates around kind of thing, is the big kind of basic thing. He's actually actively working in his language for this kind of stuff. There are certain language features that have come about in more recent years that would be kind of useful to games programmers, I think. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I mean, the one that I always talk about is type inference. Type inference is that's a whole other thing in language design. But the basic overview is type inference in programming languages. Like, you'll have seen kind of that kind of thing in JavaScript, although JavaScript's type system is kind of weird and funky. But in languages like C and C++, when you have a piece of data, it has to be of a specific type. And the type system will check when you're building the program, it will check whether or not it conforms within certain rules. And if it doesn't, the compiler will shout at you. But one of the things that you have to do in a lot of these languages like C and C++ is you have to explicitly state, this is of this type.
Yeah.
And after you've been doing that for 4 years, you kind of start to resent it a little bit. And so part of the language I've been building is kind of to reduce that kind of friction, to reduce that annoyance by try and make the compiler, and by extension the language, smarter.
Finally, do you find that your practice is more games focused, or do you think it's more broader than that?
For the programming language thing, it was actually in part due to the unknown of knowing where I was going to be when I graduated university. See, one of the things I didn't mention about the burnout that I was experiencing was that I actually was starting to seriously question whether I wanted to work in games. It's kind of funny how things work out that way. But that was part of what making this programming language thing was. It was a bid to try and be as employable with as general a skill set as possible, so I could move to somewhere out with games if I needed to. I was very fortunate in that I didn't have to. I was in the right place at the right time to work for Pocket-Sized Hands, which is the company that I work at now. But what I found as well during our day-to-day work that we do there, we do games stuff, but Pocket-Sized is a very different philosophy, I find, than much larger companies do, in the sense that we have a much more general and broad kind of experience of working. So we do, as I would have hoped when I was, doing and researching the programming and stuff, we do a kind of a broad, we get a general overview of everything. So we find, like, I've dabbled in kind of web technology stuff for them, which has been kind of cool. So I find that it's not as games, it's certainly majority of it games focused, but it's not out with the realms of possibility to end up going into areas that are not solely games related, which is kind of, well, I say kind of cool. It's really cool. It's great.
Well, I think that was super fascinating, and thank you so much for your time, Jonathan. That was really interesting to sort of get a really thorough analysis of not only what you did at the show, but kind of what you're doing in your work now, which is fascinating.
Yeah.
Emily, Fraser, do you have any final notes to pop in?
No.
No, not really. I'm just thankful that you've opened up my views to what coding can be, because it doesn't have to be tedious, I guess.
Yeah, program in the way that makes the most sense to you. If you're working on a project for a long time, you want to enjoy what you're doing. Obviously, this isn't guaranteed, because if you're working with other people, you have to know how to collaborate. You need to have a consistent set of programming standards, all that kind of stuff. But if you're doing something just for you, that you're going to be the sole or majority worker on, it's better to work in a way that makes sense to you.
Yeah, And that isn't just programming, that's everything really.
Yeah.
Any work.
That's a great design lesson generally. That's helpful. So, I mean, thanks again, Jonathan. We hope that our viewers can join us next week for the next interview in YPC's Design Unlocked series with a brand new designer. Bye. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you.